the haunted house job. I'll start by explaining what I do for a living to give some context. I run a personal service, though some might call it a business. Essentially, I get paid to break into homes or buildings, destroy or steal whatever my clients want, provide proof, and then I get paid handsomely. Most of my clients are middle-class men angry at their bosses or people seeking revenge on an ex. It's work that many desire to do themselves but don't have the nerve, so I do it for them. One day, I got a call from a new client who wanted me to break into an abandoned home not far from my area. He requested I retrieve some old recordings, VHS tapes, cassettes, DVDs, anything that looked interesting. Despite the large payment he offered, he told me almost nothing useful about the house or even himself. When I finally arrived at the location, it was different from what I expected. It wasn't isolated or hidden. It was in the middle of a busy street, surrounded by other populated homes and buildings. I had to wait until after dark when the streets were empty to make my move. The house was old, 2 stories high with a small attic and a single window at the top. The door had several rusted locks, but it opened easily with just a tap from my foot. As I entered, I wasn't scared of the dark, but the confined spaces made me want to finish the job quickly. The first room was completely empty, which was both good and bad. It meant no obstacles, but also meant I'd have to search the entire house. The second floor was just as empty, leaving me no choice but to check the attic. I wasn't thrilled about the attic, as I don't like tight spaces, but I pulled down the creaky ladder and climbed up. In the attic, there were 3 old boxes filled with VHS tapes. I didn't even bother looking through them. I grabbed an entire box and hurried down the ladder. As I dropped the box to the floor, it made a loud crash, much louder than expected, but I didn't check to see if any tapes were broken. I just wanted out. That's when I first noticed something strange. A small red dot of light in the corner of the room. I didn't stop to investigate, growing more paranoid by the second. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed another red at the bottom of a stairway I hadn't seen before. It led to a basement. Carrying the heavy box, I tripped on the stairs and fell, tumbling down the entire staircase. The box of tapes broke my fall, and though I was in pain, I quickly grabbed the closest 3 tapes and bolted out of the house. I made it back home without incident, but the next morning, I was sore all over. I tried calling the client several times, but he never answered. The number was disconnected. Frustrated, I decided to watch the tapes in case the client called back. The first one was static for a few minutes until a picture appeared. The date read August 2nd, 2010, and the footage was of an empty room in poor condition. A woman entered the room, calling for someone named Michael. She seemed frantic, searching the room before taking out her phone for light and heading towards a stairway. The tape cut to static after that. The second tape was dated March 14th, 2013, showing another empty room. This time, an older man entered with a flashlight, pulling down the attic ladder. He didn't speak, but as he climbed up, the footage ended. I started to realize those red dots were cameras, recording everything in the house. The third tape showed the same man stumbling down the stairs, injured and clutching his arm. At the top of the stairs stood a figure, about 6 feet tall, wearing a mask made of ragged cloth. It dragged the man down the stairs into a basement room and kicked him inside. From behind the closed door, I could hear scratching and inhuman screams before everything fell silent. The footage ended with the sight of frail, gray creatures climbing the walls. I was terrified. I had been in that house and I had been recorded just like them. After burning the tapes, I tried to resume life as normal. But a few weeks later, I received a package with 3 more VHS tapes. The first tape showed footage of me entering the house. The second showed me tripping on the stairs, but I hadn't tripped. Figure had pushed me. The third tape was taken outside my own home. Someone or something was watching me. Now, I'm constantly paranoid, seeing masked figures out of the corner of my eye. I keep receiving tapes, footage of my own house, each one bringing the camera closer. The Witch of Belgrano Street. My name is Segundo Zarang, and I currently reside in a small town called La Prida, located in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's a quiet place, one of those small towns where you can still leave your doors unlocked and your bicycles outside without worrying about thieves. People here don't seem to care much for material things. Some of my relatives live on the outskirts, including my grandparents. That's one of the reasons I decided to move here. The other reason was the opportunity for rural work. La Prida is a country town, and it offers that life I always loved: calm, peaceful, away from the hustle and bustle. Now, one thing you have to understand about this place is that it's steeped in old stories. Most of the people here are elderly, and many of them have tales of strange beings from the area, or witches who live alone in the hills. I used to think those stories were just something for the old folks to entertain themselves with, but I wasn't ready for what was about to happen. It all started the week I moved, Wednesday, July 17th to be exact. I arrived in La Prida by bus, carrying just a few bags of clothes and personal belongings. My new home was a small ranch, a little place that used to belong to a couple from Buenos Aires who had bought it to escape the city. It had been vacant for years, and I was thrilled to finally have a place of my own, away from everything. But I couldn't shake the stories I'd heard about how some houses in this area had strange pasts. There were rumors about previous owners being involved in witchcraft or strange sections. Still, I shrugged them off. I was too excited about my new home to let those stories bother me. After settling in and unpacking, I decided to do some shopping in town to get a few things for dinner. I found a small store near the town square, run by a sweet old woman named Norita. She was about 70 years old and had this warm, grandmotherly smile that instantly put me at ease. Over the next few days, we became friends. Norita knew everyone in town and seemed to have a story for everything. One afternoon, when I mentioned the address of my house, at the end of Belgrano Street, I noticed her expression change. She turned from the counter with a nervous smile, asking me to repeat where I lived. When I did, her face went pale. "You mean where the Pena family from Buenos Aires lived?" she asked, her voice shaking a bit. "Yes, that's the place," I replied, wondering why she was acting so strangely. Norita sighed deeply and began to explain, her voice a little unsteady. "That house, it's one of the oldest in town. Over 90 years old at least. You see, when I was a girl, about 12 or 13 years old, my father always warned us to never go near it. He'd say it was cursed. There was a woman who lived there, Ana Maria del Tilo. They called her the Witch of Tilo, though we kids didn't believe it at first. We thought it was just a story to keep us out of trouble. But it wasn't just a story. Norita told me about hooded figures visiting the house late at night, people no one could ever recognize. They wore long, tattered black robes, their faces always hidden. The townspeople whispered about strange rituals and unexplainable occurrences. And then there were the young men, like a school friend of Norita's, who had dared to sneak up to the house at night, only to return terrified or, in one case, to disappear entirely without a trace. She said, "The house has had at least 8 different owners, and all of them left suddenly. Some in the middle of the night, others with just the clothes on their backs. They said strange things happened there, things they couldn't explain. Despite Norita's warnings, I brushed it all off. I told her not to worry, that I wasn't afraid of some ghost stories. But that night, that was when it all began. I'd spent the entire day working, completely exhausted by the time I returned home. All I wanted was to eat something and go to bed. But when I opened the door, I was hit by a blast of cold air. It was strange since it wasn't particularly cold outside, and I was sure I had closed all the windows before leaving. Still, I tried to ignore it, cooked myself a small meal, and turned on my old TV to watch the news. Halfway through, the screen began to distort. Static took over, and the sound faded into a jumble of incomprehensible noise. Frustrated, I fiddled with the antennas, trying to fix the signal. As I moved the antennas, I swear I heard a voice, a whisper in the static. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But then, clear as day, I heard it again. Shoo! Startled, I stepped back. The TV turned off on its own. Now, I was getting unnerved, but I convinced myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. Later that night, as I lay in bed, something felt off. No matter how much I shifted, I couldn't get comfortable. I kept tossing and turning, feeling restless, until, out of nowhere, I heard the TV switch on in the kitchen. I was sure I had unplugged it earlier when it malfunctioned, yet there it was, playing the news at full volume. I got up to investigate, and as I approached the kitchen, I noticed the TV was indeed unplugged, yet it was broadcasting as if nothing was wrong. Then, just as suddenly, it turned off again, accompanied by a loud click. The next moment, I felt an intense cold spread through my body as if I'd been plunged into ice water. I collapsed onto the bed, paralyzed. Couldn't move, couldn't scream. I'd heard of sleep paralysis, but this was different. It wasn't just that I couldn't move. Something else was in the room. I began to hear whispers, soft at first, but growing louder. A faint melody, voices singing in harmony. Then, footsteps, bare feet on the cold floor, slowly approaching from the hallway, getting closer with each step. My eyes darted to the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, an old woman, half hidden in the shadows of the doorway, staring into the room. Her body was hunched over, covered in a filthy blanket. Her bony arms stretched out in front of her as she stepped forward, inching closer and closer. I tried to pray, reciting every prayer I could remember, my heart racing. And then, just like that, she was gone. The room was empty, save for the cold and the stench of damp earth. I could finally move, but I was too shaken to sleep. The next morning, I left. I packed my things and moved in with my uncles. I haven't been back to that house since, and I have no plans to ever return. I don't know what haunts that place, whether it's the spirit of Anna Maria or something else entirely, but whatever it is, it's not something I care to confront again. I'm putting the house up for sale. Maybe someone braver or crazier will be able to deal with whatever's inside. But not me. Never again. The entity in the cabin. Today, I want to share an experience that, while not the most terrifying I've ever had, is certainly the one that has left the deepest mark on me. You see, I've had paranormal experiences ever since I was a child. Toys would move on their own, shadows would flit past, and I used to talk to what people called imaginary friends. As I grew older and moved to different houses, these experiences became more intense. I'd feel something lying next to me in bed, lights would flicker, and doors would slam shut, despite me being completely alone. But these events never scared me much. They never harmed me, and I never saw anything that gave me nightmares. Over time, I convinced myself that fear would only make these entities stronger. So I learned to live with them. They became part of the background of my life, nothing more than occasional, eerie occurrences. However, the story I want to share today is different. This one made me realize that not all energies are harmless. Some can hurt us. That's the message I want to pass along. I studied biology at a university in the state of Campeche, Mexico. Part of the curriculum involved field trips, which were the best part of studying biology, in my opinion. We visited forests, camped on beaches, snorkeled, and even trekked through jungles. During these trips, nothing supernatural had ever happened to me, though we spent countless nights in the middle of nowhere. It became almost a ritual to sit around the campfire, telling horror stories, urban legends, and sharing personal experiences. The most famous stories revolved around the Ixtabay, the Yucatan Peninsula's version of La Llorona, and the Aluxes, mischievous spirits or goblins said to live in the wilderness. I always stuck around for the stories, not because I wasn't scared, but because I felt safer with the group than being left alone. But everything changed on one particular field trip in October 2019 in a small town within Campeche. The trip was 3 days and 2 nights long, and we stayed in a hostel on the outskirts of town. The locals were wonderful, and despite what happened, I'll always appreciate how they tried to help me. The first day, we arrived at the town around 11 in the morning, settled into our cabins, and prepared for our fieldwork. We spent the day setting up traps, placing nets for birds, and enjoying the beauty of nature. By dusk, we returned to the hostel, ready for dinner and the night's activities. The food was spicy, as the owners were originally from northern Mexico, but I brought my own provisions because I can't tolerate spiciness. This meant I was left alone in the cabin while my classmates ate in the dining room, which was in the owner's house, a few meters away from the cabins. That's when it all started. After everyone left for dinner, I took the opportunity to shower so I wouldn't have to rush later when my roommates returned. As I stood in the bathroom, I heard movement in the bedroom area and then, faintly, someone calling my name. I turned off the water and called out, but there was no response. I waited a few seconds, asked again if anyone was there, but still, nothing. Thinking maybe it was just my imagination, I finished my shower, put on my pajamas, and stepped out into the bedroom. It was completely empty, just as I'd left it. Trying to shake off the unease, I made myself a sandwich and sat on one of the beds. That's when I began to feel an inexplicable chill. I got up to check the window and the air conditioning, but everything was closed and off. I ignored it and went to bed. We had decided to take turns sleeping in the beds, and I chose the farthest corner from the door, next to the bathroom wall. Despite usually struggling with insomnia, I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. But my rest didn't last long. I was jolted awake when one of my roommates nudged me with her foot. Groggy and irritated, I asked what she wanted. She looked worried and told me my face was completely red, like I had a fever, and that my breathing was labored. When I touched my face, it felt boiling hot. I was suddenly overwhelmed with nausea and barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. We thought it might be food poisoning, but I hadn't eaten anything from the hostel. I brushed my teeth and went back to bed, hoping I'd feel better the next day. But around 3 a.m., I woke up again, freezing cold. This time, I couldn't move. I recognized the symptoms of sleep paralysis and tried to calm myself, but then I heard it. Someone whispering my name again, this time from the left side of the bed, where only a wall stood. Fear crept over me, and the more I tried to focus, the worse it got. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, agonizing pain in my stomach, like someone was squeezing my insides with their hands. The pain was so intense that it pulled me out of the paralysis, and I stumbled out of bed to vomit again. After that, the rest of the night was a blur. The next morning, I woke up in my sleeping bag, surrounded by concerned friends. They informed the teacher, still assuming it was food poisoning, but my professor seemed more worried than usual. He suggested I move to the owner's house, where I could rest more comfortably. I refused at first, not wanting to be left out while my classmates continued with the day's activities. But no matter what I ate or drank, I would immediately vomit it back up. My friends brought me medicine to relieve the pain in my stomach and throat from vomiting so much, but no matter what, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like something was with me, constantly. Later, after most of the group had left, my professor again insisted that I stay in the owner's house. Intrigued by his nervousness, I decided I'd try to join the group later in the day, when the heat died down. I managed to get a few minutes of sleep, but those few minutes were the most disturbing of my life. I dreamt I was lying in bed, watching myself sleep. Then, a dark figure appeared beside me. It had long, grotesque limbs, and though it had no face, I could feel it watching me. I woke up with a start, clutching my stomach in pain, and rushed to the bathroom once again. I knew, without a doubt, that this was not food poisoning. When my classmates returned, the teacher arranged for me to join a team that would stay close to the cabins, just in case I felt worse. I managed to eat an apple without getting sick, and as the sun began to set, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as we made our way back to the cabins, walking along a narrow path through a soybean field, something happened. I was walking slowly behind the group when I heard it again. Someone whispered my name, clearly annoyed, from the grass. My companions fell silent, and then we all heard it. laughter, followed by stones being thrown at us from both sides of the path. There was no one around. Scared, we hurried back to the group, and my friends told the guide what had happened. She simply said, "That's what happens when you don't show respect in places like this," and continued walking. Later, as we talked, one of my classmates asked the guide if he'd ever experienced anything truly terrifying in these fields. With a serious expression, the guide said something I'll never forget. "Whatever's in the cabin only attacks when someone is alone. It feeds off energy. You must have been easy prey when you stayed behind alone." He went on to tell me that years ago, as a student, he experienced something similar: cold, stomach pains, and nausea whenever he was alone in the old palapis that used to stand where the cabins are now. I followed his advice and didn't enter the cabin alone that night. I waited on the porch for my friends, and once we were all together, I felt safer. The owners even prepared a special rice drink for me, as they knew I hadn't eaten all day. That night, I slept in bed, sandwiched between my friends. But when I woke up early in the morning, I felt a lump at the foot of the bed. Fear gripping me, I slowly turned to look, only to find one of my roommates lying awkwardly across the foot of the bed, wide awake. I asked her why she was there, and she told me something that made my blood run cold. She said that when she got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, she saw a large shadow in the corner where her sleeping bag was. It wasn't just the darkness of the room, it was something else. She felt like it was challenging her, watching her. Too scared to go back to her sleeping bag, she had climbed into bed with us instead. Luckily, that was our last day at the hostel. As we boarded the bus to leave, I felt a sudden, strange sensation, like a tight knot in my stomach was slowly loosening as we got farther away. By the time we were a few miles down the road, the tension had completely disappeared. I realized then that I had been physically reacting to whatever was in that cabin. When I got home, my family took protective measures immediately. My aunt, who's considered a white witch, performed a cleansing ritual. Days later, she gave me a bracelet blessed by a nun and told me never to take it off. Since that day, I've never had another paranormal experience. It's like the bracelet blocked out whatever was following me. Even during the pandemic, when I lived alone, I never felt afraid or unsettled. I've come to the conclusion that our faith in protection has kept us safe. And though I don't know for sure if it's the bracelet or not, I have no intention of taking it off to find out. Some things are better left alone. I hope you guys have a fun, happy, and possessed Halloween. And if you liked today's video, then subscribe, like, and share.